everyone. Welcome to our, what is this, April now? April meeting of the New Bedford Civil War Roundtable. Happy that you're all here on a lovely evening. We've lucked out the last few days with some really nice weather finally, so hopefully that's a good sign of spring coming. Just a few announcements, things to keep in mind. We have a busy month in May coming up. Quite a few things happening. So Saturday, May 23rd is our annual Memorial Day service at Rural Cemetery over here in New Bedford. Starts at 9 a.m. It's free, open to everybody. Bring a friend, bring family with you. Usually no longer than 45 minutes. It's a pretty succinct ceremony, but a meaningful way to start off Memorial Day weekend. So we want to encourage everybody to join us for that. Again, in Rural Cemetery in the Civil War section. If you drive through, you'll see it. Got a big American flag and cannons, gives it away. My father and I actually just went out there before we came here, and the graves there are showing marked improvement from the work that we've done. So if you're not familiar, we underwent a project to clean all of those graves. There's over 300 of them in that Civil War section, and they are all looking, I don't want to overspeak, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but they're all looking very good. They've come a long way, and a few of them need a little bit more TLC, but they're on their way to being restored in a way that they haven't been, at least for the last 5-6 decades, probably at least. So, very meaningful project that we've undergone, and it's going to be great to be there on Memorial Day in the midst of those graves for that. So please join us May 23rd, 9 a.m. Our next meeting will be 5/26, Tuesday, May 26th at 6 p.m. David Kelly, professor over at the Navy War College, will be speaking about the Lincoln-Seward relationship. And then we will have our June annual meeting on June 23rd. A little bit different this year. Normally we do a picnic. This year we're going to forego the picnic, have the annual meeting. We want that to be an opportunity for members to come and discuss the future of the roundtable. We want it to kind of be more of an open forum. We'll present our budget, we'll present what we spent money on this year, and kind of turn the floor over to you, so that way we can hear, what do you want to see from this organization as we move forward. So that's June 23rd. We'll have light refreshments, pastries, and coffee for that evening. So June 23rd, that's our annual meeting. I think that was all of the major. Yes, Peter?
Mark, just before I left tonight to come to our meeting, I was able to get through to the mayor's office in New Bedford, and the gal Melissa Sears confirmed for me there's a strong likelihood that the mayor can make an appearance at a Memorial Day service for a few remarks. So that would be real nice to have the mayor of the city of New Bedford attending our session on the 23rd of May.
Good news. Thank you, Peter. We always love it when Mayor Mitchell can join us, so that's good news. This evening, we're very lucky to have Stephen Evangelista with us to talk a little bit about his book, Forever Silence, the story of the Gettysburg Gun. Stephen graduated valedictorian from Providence College, fellow PC Friar, and pursued advanced academic study at Harvard Extension School in Boston, Massachusetts. He is a dedicated living historian and serves as a corporate officer and active member of Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery. He is also a member of the United States Field Artillery Association and was selected to serve as a faculty for the Civil War Institute Summer Conference at Gettysburg College. A senior federal executive, Stephen serves as Chief of Digital Services at the Social Security Administration and has been a member of the Senior Executive Service since 2013. Stephen is the author of 3 critically recognized works on the American Civil War. His first book, Our Story, The Lives and Legacy of Those Who Served in Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery, in 2021, was selected for inclusion in the permanent collection of the Gettysburg National Military Park Library and Research Center, and recognized by leading scholarly and military institutions. His second book, Forever Silence, the story of the Gettysburg Gun, in 2024, was added to the permanent collection of both Gettysburg National Military Park and Adams County Historical Society, and was shortlisted for the Gettysburg Bachelor Coddington Award. In November 2025, he published No Sacrifice Too Great, the letters and diary of Sergeant Albert Aaron Strait, chronicling the life and service of Rhode Island volunteer who commanded the famed Gettysburg Gun on July 3rd, 1863. His work has reached national and international audiences, including readers in Canada, France, Italy, and Australia. Throughout his career, Stephen has received numerous honors, including the Honorable Order of St. Barbara Medal, Federal Innovator of the Year, and the Presidential Rank Award, the highest distinction awarded to senior federal executives. A committed philanthropist, he donates all proceeds from his books to support educational initiatives for Battery B 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery and to advance the preservation and study of the American Civil War. A native of Rhode Island, Stephen currently resides in Maryland with his wife and 2 children. With that, Stephen, we are more than honored and grateful to welcome you to speak to our group this evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Mark, for having me here tonight, and appreciate everyone coming out. If all of us were to get back in our cars and take a quick field trip to the Varnum Armory in East Greenwich, Rhode Island, we'd find something pretty interesting there. If you walked into its massive drill hall, whoa, all right. Mark?
We love technology.
We love technology.
It's great.
The alternative is to slightly cut it out.
Let's try that.
There we go.
Sorry about that.
If you were to walk into the Varnum Armory's massive drill hall, you'd find something pretty interesting. Because there, on its original #2 wooden gun carriage, is a model 1857 Napoleon. Now, there's a lot to see at the Varnum Armory, so you'd be forgiven if you walked right by it and you didn't really look closely. But if you did look closely, you'd find something very unusual. Because there, lodged in its bronze muzzle, is a 12-pound iron cannonball. Now, this gun was last fired on the afternoon of July 3rd, 1863. And that afternoon, a Confederate shell shrieked across the field, carving a line and making a direct hit on this gun, denting its muzzle with that glancing blow. When the surviving cannoneers tried to reload this gun, that 12-pound iron cannonball became lodged in the muzzle. And it's been there ever since. 163 years. Now that's a long time. And a lot has happened during that time. And a lot could have happened during that time. And that's the funny thing about history, isn't it? Because we can't imagine it happening any differently. As if history was inevitable. But see, that's why I'm here tonight. Because I'm going to illuminate for us how the existence of this gun, today known as the Gettysburg Gun, how its continued existence has hinged on history's most hazardous hours, and how even the slightest alteration to that trajectory would have changed its destination with fate. How circumstance and chance fell in one way and not another. How interruptions and disruptions and accidents and mishaps and luck and synchronicity all played a pivotal role in its legacy. The other reason why I'm here tonight is to tell you truthfully that the Gettysburg Gun should have never survived the battle at Gettysburg. And it should have never survived the American Civil War. And it should not be on display tonight at the Varnum Memorial Armory. But it is. So we're going to peel back this historical veneer of inevitability. If you haven't guessed already, my second book, Forever Silenced, is the story of the Gettysburg Gun. And I am honored tonight to have with me two very important people who allowed me to be able to write this book. First and foremost, I was granted access to a never-before-seen collection of diaries, articles, photos, relics, you name it, belonging to Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery. Captain Phil DeMaria is here tonight. And I thank you, Phil, for your trust in writing this book. Secondly, Mr. Steve Del Signore, who helped, and more than helped, designed and formatted this book and creatively helped to display Forever Silenced. Thank you, Steve, so much. The collaboration is amazing. But to understand the story of the Gettysburg Gun, I've got to take us back to 1861, to a Tuesday morning, August 13th. On that morning, on August 13th, 1861, 139 souls would enlist with Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery, in this building, the Benefit Street Arsenal in Providence, Rhode Island. That Tuesday morning, when they signed their names to the muster roll, they would become part of the Army of the Potomac. And they would serve with the Army of the Potomac for the next 4 years. They were involved in every major engagement, starting with Ball's Bluff in 1861. You name it in your head, they were there. Antietam, Fredericksburg, Gettysburg, the Wilderness, all the way through to Appomattox. Folks, when the war was over in June of 1865, only 17 of the original 139 returned home to Providence. Their service was both glorious and gruesome. But it was at Gettysburg where their gun would earn its namesake, the Gettysburg Gun. Well, we're having problems again. We were doing so well. Where's Mr. Mark? Maybe we should just revert to keyboard.
We may want to.
All right, well, we're going to do that. All right, well, Mr. Cameraman, I'm going to switch sides. All right. It would be at Gettysburg where the Gettysburg Gun would earn its namesake. Now, here's the interesting part. The Gettysburg Gun is named after the Battle of Gettysburg, but it was manned by what? A Rhode Island detachment. But it was actually manufactured in Boston, Massachusetts by this man, Henry Northey Hooper. Now, Henry Northey Hooper was an apprentice to a very famous revolutionary patriot, Mr. Paul Revere. The Gettysburg Gun was actually cast in Revere's foundry because Hooper purchased Revere's foundry. So the Gettysburg Gun was actually cast. It was the second gun cast in 1862, weighing 1,239 pounds. Now, the battery would not come into possession of the Gettysburg Gun until a year into its service. Now remember, they muster in August of 1861. They would not come to get the Gettysburg Gun until July 31st of 1862 at Harrison's Landing. Their original park of 6 guns were turned in. Their vent holes were really worn, and they got 6 brand new 12-pound light Napoleons. One of them was destined to become the Gettysburg Gun. Now, I'm going to have to make an agreement with all of you. I'm going to refer to the Gettysburg Gun as the Gettysburg Gun, even before it was called the Gettysburg Gun, just because tonight's about the Gettysburg Gun. Are you okay with that? Otherwise, I could call it the 4th of 6 guns. It's going to get geeky. So it's going to be called the Gettysburg Gun. I'll explain to you when it actually becomes known as the Gettysburg Gun, but I'll refer to it as that. No sooner did the battery come into possession of the Gettysburg Gun, did history's events transpire, perhaps even conspire against its continued existence. Let me explain. 1 month into having that gun, the ship, the vessel that was carrying the Gettysburg Gun, nearly sunk in a storm. The tugboat that was actually towing this vessel cut its lines in the storm and just let it drift. By all accounts, the Gettysburg Gun should be sitting at the bottom of the Chesapeake today, but it's not, because the brave soldiers and sailors on board were able to bring that vessel safely to port. But that was its first near miss. Its second close call came in September of 1862. We all know what that is? Where's my Antietam guy? Yeah. September 17th. Battery B would find itself crossing Antietam Creek, and they would find themselves in Miller's Cornfield, north of the Dunker Church. For 15 merciless minutes, they would be shelled until, luckily, the battery was called into the reserve. But by all accounts, the Gettysburg Gun probably shouldn't have made it out of there either. It's actually the bloodiest day of the war. But the Gettysburg Gun would be spared from the Battle of Antietam. In November, the Union Army was suffering from a very mysterious, what they called hoof disease. Many, many Union horses fell ill. And many of the Union batteries were forced to turn in their guns because they could not transport them. Battery B lost 45 of their 114 horses, but were able to what? Able to replace them. Otherwise, the Gettysburg Gun would have had a date with oblivion because we would have never known about it. It would have been turned in, and it would have never served past that date. But somehow, it remained in service. In December of 1862, the Gettysburg Gun would face its most severe test to date. We all know what this picture is, Fredericksburg. December of 1862, Battery B would be one of the first Union batteries to cross the icy Rappahannock River into the shattered town of Fredericksburg, which they had shelled for 2 days previously. And they would find themselves marching down Caroline Street and onto the battlefield. And as they marched down Caroline Street, they would hear from another battery, Battery A, 1st Rhode Island, "There goes Battery B to hell." And they were not kidding. Battery B was ordered within 150 yards of the rifle pits along the sunken road on Maurice Heights, 150 yards out. One of the officers would shout to the general, "My God, General, you're going to lose all your guns. A battery cannot live out there." To which the general shot back, "Then they can die out there." That assault went on for 45 minutes. Battery B and the detachment of men from the Gettysburg Gun would sustain very heavy casualties, 16 men and 12 horses, before they were called off of the field. In command of the Gettysburg Gun at Fredericksburg and throughout the life of the Gettysburg Gun was this man, Sergeant Albert Aaron Strait, 32 years old, from Exeter, Rhode Island. He was married before the war to the love of his life, Angeline Avery Tillinghast Strait. They had 2 children, Laura Amanda, who was born in 1858, and Charlie, who was born in 1860. 8 days after little Charlie's birth, Angeline would die from complications following childbirth. Strait would have to make a choice in those months before the war. Either I'm going to remain a father or I'm going to enlist. Eventually, he would choose patriotism over paternal bonds, and he would enlist with Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery. Sergeant Albert Aaron Strait is a remarkable individual, and I'm very, very lucky to have been able to publish his letters and diary. Remarkable in the fact that he was an ordinary father and husband, but a wonderful and very dedicated soldier, very smart, very dedicated, loyal, often sick, but enduring. And you will see as we progress through this story the role that he plays in the Gettysburg Gun. But the Gettysburg Gun would not become the Gettysburg Gun until it arrives at Gettysburg. And this is kind of where the Gettysburg Gun's luck will eventually sort of run out. I'm going to bring you back to that moment. Battery B will be at Gettysburg on July 2nd and July 3rd, 1863. I'm going to bring you back to the morning of July 2nd. They have just marched 40 miles over the last couple of days from Falmouth, Virginia to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And now, around 5 o'clock in the morning, they're marching the last 8 miles up the Tonytown Road to get to the front in Gettysburg. How many of you have been to Gettysburg? Good, hey, everybody. Okay, wonderful. This is Cemetery Ridge. And on Cemetery Ridge, they would come up and be posted in the morning around Hancock Avenue. You all know what I'm talking about, that road right where that big bronze book is? Okay. In about mid-afternoon, they'd be called out 150 yards beyond the stone wall that snakes itself along Cemetery Ridge. Now, that wall's not there today. It's mainly gone. But it would have been about this high. And that wall had an opening in it. See that little opening there? Today it's called Brown's Gate because the commander of the battery was T. Fred Brown. But here's why I'm mentioning it. In order to get out into the field, 150 yards beyond that stone wall, 6 guns of Battery B had to go single file through that opening, which they did. At about 6 o'clock in the afternoon, the battery is now engaged in a duel with a Confederate battery that's on the other side of the Chambersburg Pike. They're around Lee's headquarters, and they're firing now on Meade's headquarters. Now, I am going to get nerdy for a moment here, because this is an important feature of this story. The 6 guns of Battery B are all on a right oblique, meaning they're all on an angle facing to the right, taking out that Confederate battery, which they do successfully. And when they're done doing that, they hear behind them along this wall where infantry, Union infantry, are lined up, they hear cheering and shouts. And they think, well, thank you. Appreciate the support. They thought that they were cheering them on until they realized that out of the corner of their left eye, there are men coming out of the tree line. And at first, the battery thought, well, this must be reserves. Maybe it's Sickles' men, the 3rd Corps. They're falling back. This is good. Wrong. This is Ambrose Wright's Georgia Brigade. It's the 48th Georgia, the 22nd, the 3rd Georgia. And they are sweeping across the field like a hurricane. Screaming demons just coming up. This is 1,500 men against 120 artillerists. And they were dead set on one thing, the prize of that battery. Now, T. Fred Brown, who's in command of the battery that day, will order the battery to retreat off the field. But before that, they're going to have to go from a right oblique to a left oblique, because now they're going to have to fire upon these men that are coming from the other side of the field. Guns 6, 5, 3, and 4 can do this. But guns 1 and 2, if they make that pivot, what's going to happen? They're going to fire on their own men. Right? So they fire into the tree line for a while, and then they get out of there. Guns 1 and 2 come through Brown's Gate pretty good. Pretty good. Guns 3 and 5 try that maneuver, and they get into a pretty bad traffic jam. Now, the Georgians are pretty close. And as those guns try to go through that gap, what happens? They lose horses. The guns start to slow down. Guns 6 and 4, remember 4 is the magic number. 4 is the Gettysburg Gun, in command of Sergeant Albert Strait. We'll try to fire one last round of double canister. Even though they've been ordered off the field, Sergeant Strait will try to give his men one fighting chance to get out of there. And will fire one round of double canister. In the midst of doing this, 2 of Strait's horses are shot dead. And then the other 4. So he loses all of his horses. This man, David B. King, 26 years old from Cranston, Rhode Island, would be pretty dedicated in trying to limber the gun, meaning he's trying to lift the trail of the Gettysburg Gun up and put it onto the limber to get that gun off the field. In the act of doing that, he gets hit by close range fire. George R. Madison, who happened to be standing next to him, who wrote after the war that David B. King held up his hand and said, "I'm hit, I'm hit." And he fell into the dirt, and he died just a couple minutes later. So Strait is taking major casualties out there. Other men are getting killed out there as well. Ira Bennett, David Flynn, I could go on. But they take some serious casualties at that position. Strait and his men will have to do what they don't want to do. They're going to abandon the Gettysburg Gun, and they're going to make a beeline for that stone wall, which they do. And the Gettysburg Gun is left out on the field. Well, you can imagine what happens next. The Georgians capture the Gettysburg Gun, and they use it as cover to discharge their weapons from behind its wheels. Now, they don't fire the gun, but they are firing from behind the gun. Later in the evening, the brave men from the 169th Pennsylvania will come up They will surge across the field. They will bring this gun back by hand and return it to the boys from Battery B. Now, that's July 2nd. That's a pretty bad day. Pretty bad day for Battery B. Lots of casualties. By the way, 22 altogether, if you're wondering. Massive loss in horse strength. When they bring the guns back across that stone wall, guns 5 and 6 will be brought to the rear. Why? Because they don't have enough men and horses to man these guns. So guns 1, 2, 3, and 4 will be brought to the field the next day. They'll be put in battery that next day. Okay? If we were to join the battery on July 3rd, 1863, that morning, hot, humid, around 87 degrees, drizzling, okay? There was a silence that morning that the men talk about. A silence almost unto death, they called it. Both armies are trying to get the range, if you will, of where these armies are. They're firing, they're trying to get range. The men from Battery B are hungry, they're tired. Their ration wagon came so close to getting to them. There's this great guy named Bob Niles who always reached them. And just as he's about to come up over the ridge, 2 signal guns go off on the other side of the field, one on the right and then another one near the peach orchard. And they knew exactly what that was. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, this massive artillery barrage. The barrage we know now as the one that precedes Pickett's charge is beginning. And Battery B will be called to their posts on their gun. Think about this for just a minute. The battery will wait 15 minutes. All of the Union artillery basically will wait 15 minutes before they're ordered to fire back. So they're shelled and they're basically under fire without being able to fire back for 15 minutes. But once they are receiving that order, they will be engaged in basically a 2-hour barrage, the largest on the North American continent. Now think for a moment. The Gettysburg gun so far nearly sunk, shelled in Antietam, almost lost to the artillery reserve. Fredericksburg, at Gettysburg, it was captured and then returned and then finds itself in the largest artillery barrage. About an hour and a half into this duel, now the battery, by the way, these 4 guns, they're firing continuously. I'm going to take you to the moment where the Gettysburg gun actually becomes the Gettysburg gun. This man, William Jones, 25 years old, from Boston, Massachusetts, will be at the limber cutting fuses when one of the men who's at the number 1 position will fall down. Jones will say to his comrade John Delavan, I'm going to spell Bob. Bob Wilkinson was the guy at the number 1 position. Spell meaning I'm going to go help him out. So Jones will take up the sponge staff at the number 1 position. He will swab the gun and he's going to wait for the number 2 man to load the charge into the barrel. Now, don't get nervous. Don't get nervous. It's not real, but it is a good representation of what we're going to talk about. The number 2 man was this man, Alfred Gray Gardner. They called him Old Man Gardner. You want to guess how old he was? 42. Not old, but it's old for them. Alfred Gray Gardner was a dedicated father and husband. His wife and Alfred had 5 children. Roosevelt, Ida, Lillian, Alfred, and Margaret. He was a very, very dedicated man. And he struggled with his decision to actually enlist, but he did enlist. And he would actually have 2 things. One, he carried in his pocket a pocket Bible that he wrote in the margins, and he wrote notes. Now, this pocket Bible was very important to him. You're going to find out why in a minute. But he would also go on something what he called tramps. He would, on campaigns, pick these wild flowers, and he would press them, and he would send them to his wife when he would write letters to his wife. And she kept every one of these flowers. Alfred Gardner was a very religious and dedicated man. And so picture in your mind for a moment, you have William Jones at the number 1 position. You have Alfred Gardner at the number 2 position. The number 5 man who's carrying an ammunition round is going to come up. Now, he never holds it, but he's in a leather haversack. If you guys know a little bit about artillery. He's going to present this fixed ammunition package to Alfred Gray Gardner. Now, I just want to point out to you, the Gettysburg gun is a 12-pounder. This is a 6-pounder, but you get the gist of what this is. Okay, this is called a fixed package. It would be a 12-pound ball. Here is what they call it's like a wooden disc. It's called a sabot. And then you'd have a 2-pound charge of black powder. And it's held together by these metal straps. And the cool thing about this was you could just load it all in one shot, right? You didn't have to load the bag and this, that, and the other. Just load it in one shot. So Alfred Gardner will take the solid shot from the number 5 man. And just as he's about to insert the charge into the barrel, which, by the way, he had done for like 2 hours before. This is just another round that had come out. At that very moment, another battery on the other side of the field would load and fire their artillery piece. And that shell would shriek across the field and land a direct hit on the Gettysburg gun, denting its muzzle with that glancing blow. That shell strike would explode, and it would take off the left side of the head of William Jones. He would fly forward and probably was instantly killed, being partially decapitated. That shell strike would also take off the left arm and shoulder of Alfred Gray Gardner. Gardner would drop the solid shot and find himself in shock. He would prop himself up against the cannon's wheel, and Sergeant Strait, who was in charge of this piece, would go up to him. Why? You see, Sergeant Strait and Alfred Gray Gardner had a pact. They had an agreement. They were friends. They were tent mates. And the agreement was, if one of us should fall, please take my dying wishes to my family. Bring my effects home. Make sure that my message gets home to my family. So Strait will kneel down and will listen to Alfred Gardner's final words. Gardner tells Sergeant Strait, "Tell my wife I died happy." And he asked Strait to ensure that that Bible got home to his family. Now you got to understand, this thunderous artillery is going off, right? It's so loud. There's smoke. There's so much going on, right? Witnesses after the war will write that they heard Alfred Gray Gardner scream and shout at the top of his lungs, "Glory to God, hallelujah, amen, I am happy." And he will die just a few minutes, propped up against the cannon's left wheel. Now, Sergeant Strait will pick up the solid shot that Gardner dropped when he was mortally wounded. And he's going to attempt to reload this piece. But he knows he cannot get past the solid, there's the Bible. He cannot get past the solid shot, the dented muzzle. He knows this. So what does he do? He takes the solid shot and he takes it apart. He will dismantle this. He will rip off these iron straps. He will take the sabot, chuck it, take the black powder, shove that down the barrel as far as he could, and then he'll try to jam the ball down the muzzle. But it won't go because the muzzle is dented. So he will grab a rammer and he will try to use that rammer to jam it down the barrel, but it won't budge. So someone yells, "Grab an axe! Grab an axe from the caisson." So someone will bring up a felling axe. And Strait will use the backside of that axe trying to jam that ball down the muzzle, but it won't budge. While this is happening, another shell strike directly hits the Gettysburg gun, this time hitting the cheek, taking a chunk out of the cheek, taking a spoke out of the left wheel, and mortally wounding this man, the man they call the sturdy Irishman, John Green from Chicopee, Mass. While all of this is happening, ladies and gentlemen, The bronze barrel, hot from use over the last 2 hours, begins to cool down. And as it cools down, it clamps around the ball. It centers the ball in place, welding it there. Sergeant Albert Aaron Strait will eventually have to declare this gun unserviceable, and he will report that to Lieutenant Perrin. At the same time that the Gettysburg gun falls silent because now it cannot fire, the other 3 guns from Battery B, for want of ammunition and men, have also stopped firing. Guns along the Union line also begin to fall silent. On the other side of the field, the officers who were reporting to Colonel E. Porter Alexander, who was in charge of the Confederate artillery, will witness something. First, through the fog and the smoke, they will notice that, guess what? They're not hearing that gunfire. Auditory effect is, hey, they have stopped firing. Now, they also look through their field glasses and they report that 18 guns are leaving the hill. Now, what they're seeing are the guns from Battery B coming off of the field. They see 18, but really, what are they? There are limbers, 4. There are 4 guns. There are 4 caissons. They look like 18. It's really 4 guns. They will ask at that point for Pickett to begin the charge. Now, what am I saying to you? What I'm saying to you is that the Gettysburg gun, with the cannonball halfway lodged in the muzzle, was part of the catalyst that set off Pickett's charge. But don't take my word for it. Battery B responsible for Pickett's historic charge. Amazing. The gun that could no longer fire is the gun that helps not only change the trajectory of that battle, but the course of the war. Because we all know that Pickett's charge was ill-timed and doomed. But the battery and the Gettysburg gun would not be out of harm's way just yet. At about 3:45 in the afternoon, the drivers are going to come up and take these guns off of the field. Guns 1, 2, and 4 will head to the right, if you know where the Pennsylvania Monument is. They're going to head towards that way to the 20-town road. Gun number 3, for whatever reason, will take a cow path closer to Meade's headquarters. Why am I telling you what route they took? Well, because the 3rd gun was actually dropped near Meade's headquarters because one of its horses was disemboweled by a shell. They dropped the gun there. They said, we're going to come back for it. And when they come back for it, it's gone. Now, why is this important? Because the drivers of the Gettysburg gun, Levi Cornell and Charles Freed, have a choice to make. When they get to the 20-town road, they either have to go left or right. Now, this could be the origin of the story that men should have asked for directions but didn't. I'm not sure. It might be that story. It might not be that story. But they go left instead of right, and they actually head into the town of Gettysburg instead of taking a right to where the rest of the battery headed towards. And they will get lost, and they will camp out overnight south of Culp's Hill. In the morning on July 4th, they will find their way back to the Sarah Patterson farm. And it was there that the battery and many from the 2nd Corps would be coalescing. When the drivers of the Gettysburg gun pull into the Sarah Patterson farm, they cannot believe what they're seeing. First of all, they thought they were dead. When they do drive in, they actually start razzing them a little bit. The battery history says actually that some of the guys said, well, where'd you go, Baltimore? I said, no, we got lost. When they pull in, the men from Battery B realize what they're looking at. This gun not only has a cannonball lodged in its muzzle, but it had been hit by shell 3 times. And it had 39, they counted 39 bullet holes in its carriage and along its bronze barrel. Now, they wouldn't have had a long time to marvel at this gun, because that same afternoon, the Union Army condemned Battery B, meaning they were unfit to fight because they didn't have enough horses, they didn't have enough men, they didn't have enough ammunition. They suffered 40 casualties and 65 horses killed and wounded. By the way, 40 casualties is 1 in every 3 men. So they were forced to turn in their guns. They arrived with 6 guns. You heard me say that earlier. On the morning of July 4th, they have 3 guns. Guns 1 and 2, and gun number 4, which has a cannonball stuck in the muzzle. So they have really nothing left. The Gettysburg Gun, by the way, that's the last time they would see the Gettysburg Gun for more than a decade. Because the Gettysburg Gun would eventually make its way to the train station in Gettysburg, and from there, the Gettysburg Gun would find itself, oh, by the way, I should show you this. The 3 shell strikes, this is important. The first shell strike is going to be along the axle. I don't know if you could see it, but you see how that axle is intact, but that axle is missing a big chunk? Okay, that's the first strike. By the way, when that happens, they continue to serve the gun, okay? The second one is the one we talked about. That glancing blow, that dent in the muzzle, that's the second one that killed Alfred Gardner and William Jones. The third shell strike, watch this. See that big part of the cheek, big chunk taken out of the cheek? It's also missing a spoke in the wheel. So 3 shell strikes, and I'll show you one of the grazed bullet holes on top of but there are 39 pockmarks like that, okay? They wouldn't have had a long time to see this, as I mentioned, that the Gettysburg Gun would eventually be brought to the train station in Gettysburg and then brought down to Westminster, Maryland. Now, why Westminster, Maryland? Well, Westminster, Maryland was the place where all of the Union artillery, infantry, equipment, everything was housed there for the Battle of Gettysburg. So it comes down 97, and it's going to sit outside of the courthouse in Westminster, Maryland, along Court Street. Now, this is a modern-day view of Court Street. But imagine this, sidewalks just lined with damaged artillery pieces, one of them being the Gettysburg Gun. Now, there's the interesting part. The wonderful citizens of Westminster would actually be looking at all these damaged pieces of artillery and notice something very interesting. Say, wow, look at that gun, has a cannonball stuck in the muzzle. How did a Confederate cannonball land right in there? Well, of course it didn't, but they thought it did. And that misunderstanding helped to actually save the Gettysburg Gun. Why? Because the Union Army had plans to scrap the Gettysburg Gun, as they were going to scrap the other ones. But they thought differently. They said, maybe this is an oddity of war. And so the plans to scrap the Gettysburg Gun were scrapped themselves. And the Gettysburg Gun would go from Westminster, Maryland, on display at the Washington, D.C. Navy Yard. And there it would sit outside from 1860, many years after the war. The veterans from Battery B would establish their own Veterans Association. Every year on August 13th, the day they mustered in, they would get together, and they actually had meeting notes. I was able to read them all, a little bit of Advil of doing this, but it's all there. And these meeting notes, in the very first year, guess what their first order of business is? We want to get the Gettysburg Gun back. That gun belongs to Rhode Island. But not so fast, because they actually need an act. Okay? They actually petitioned to Governor Howard, and they actually have the signature of President Ulysses S. Grant to say the Gettysburg Gun is going to be moved from Washington, D.C. to Providence, Rhode Island. On May 21st, 1874, the Gettysburg Gun is brought back to Rhode Island in a grand military parade. By the way, the chief of staff for this event is Elijah Hunt Rhodes. So this is a big deal, okay? The gun is paraded through the streets of Providence in the pouring rain. They don't care. this gun is back. By the way, you can see the umbrellas in the foreground. Isn't that cool? The gun is paraded through the streets of Providence. They give a wonderful oration. The Reverend Carlton A. Staples gives this beautiful oration. And after the parade is over, the Battery veterans are invited to put the gun on display. Where? At the Providence Journal office, right in the lot. Well, beautiful place to display the gun. But after a certain amount of time, the Providence Journal will say, hey, thank you very much, but we kind of need our space back. And that's when the veterans realize we got a problem. Because even though the Gettysburg Gun is home, there's no plans to house it anywhere. So they did the next best thing. What you and I would do when we don't know what to do with something, well, they put it in the basement of the Benefit Street Arsenal, where this all began. Now, it was supposed to be safe there. But it's around this time in the 1870s and the 1880s where the Gettysburg Gun comes under a new kind of attack. Because state officials will eventually say, oh, we have this wonderful gun. Let's take it on parades. Let's take it out for shows and fairs. And they did this on its original carriage, on its original wheels. Now, the veterans of Battery B were not fond of doing this. So, you really shouldn't be taking it out on its original carriage. It's very delicate. But it gets worse, because vandals and relic hunters would actually carve those 39 bullets out of the gun carriage. You see a divot there. Vandalize it. Why don't we put our initials in there? Now, we don't know who the initials are. Could have been a Battery member themselves, or could have been someone that would just, hey, I'm going to put my initials. But the Gettysburg Gun would come under attack. Now, the veterans of Battery B petitioned the state of Rhode Island to please put this on a permanent exhibit, permanent display, which they eventually do outside of the original Rhode Island State House on Benefit Street. You can see this first little platform there is the Gettysburg Gun. There it is blown up for you. But what's the problem with this? The problem is it's still outside. We wanted something inside. So it wasn't until 1903, when the State House on Smith Street was finally finished, that the Gettysburg Gun would be moved inside to the North Portico. And and by the way, hey, look, they even put the congressional thing next to it. Isn't that nice? From 1903 to 1962, the Gettysburg Gun would sit in the North Portico of the Rhode Island State House. Now, in 1962, a theory was refloated. Now, I'm going to say refloated because in 1934, there was an article about this theory. And I'm going to tell you what this theory is. The theory is, and it was actually in 1962, when this captain at the Newport Navy Museum, his name was William Warren, was getting his ship ready for visitors that day, and he says to his director, he says, I know a little bit about Civil War artillery. He says, that gun at the Rhode Island State House? He says, if you know anything about loading procedures, you would have to load the black powder first, right? He says, are you saying that the Gettysburg Gun is loaded? Could be. The Gettysburg Gun could be loaded because that's how you would load it. So Jackson Jenks, who's the director of the museum, thinks this is a fascinating story. And he puts an article into the Providence Journal. Now, I don't know how many people read this article, but I know one lady who did. Her name was Mrs. Robert Dunn, and she was the great niece of George R. Madison. You heard me say his name before. He was standing next to David King when King was killed. But George R. Madison, in 1908, wrote an affidavit about the events of what happened at Gettysburg. And guess what he wrote about July 3rd? Yes, voila, that the gun is loaded. So, the Rhode Island National Guard, the Navy Ordnance Team, would descend on the Gettysburg Gun. And they would take the tube, the bronze tube of the Gettysburg Gun, off of its original carriage and bring it to a facility in North Smithfield, Rhode Island. There, They would ground the gun so as to prevent any static electricity. Good idea. And then they would take the tube and they placed it in a tank of water. Once submerged, they used a pneumatic drill to widen the vent hole. And then we think that underneath they drilled another hole, and then they used air pressure to blow 2.5 pounds of black powder out of the gun that had been loaded for 99 years and 2 months and 3 days. Now, you think that's cool, but not before they tried to drill out the ball. So sacrilegious. If you look at the Gettysburg gun today closely, you'll see that there are broken drill bits that were no match for the bronze. Eventually, the Gettysburg gun would be placed back on its original carriage and brought back to the State House. And it would stay there from 1962 to 1988. Now, why 1988? Why is that a special year? It's the 125th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. And on that year, the members from Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery, who are with us today, Phil DeMaria and Mary DeMaria, the Rhode Island National Guard, the Pennsylvania National Guard, and the Maryland National Guard, would take the Gettysburg gun from the State House and bring it back to Gettysburg and place it in the exact same spot where it had been disabled 125 years before. But this time, when they transported it on reproduction wheels, and then they put the original wheels back on during the display. And this time, they never left the Gettysburg gun outside by itself. As you will see, it was protected by a tent. They actually formed a human shield around this gun with the National Guard. And every 15 minutes for 3 days, from July 1st through July 3rd of 1988, they told the story of the Gettysburg gun, the story that I just told to you. On July 3rd, 1988, around 2:30 in the afternoon, ironically, a lone fifer will march out to the battery's second-day marker and will play a haunting rendition of Amazing Grace. And it just so happened to be, ironically, at 2:30 in the afternoon, the exact same time that Gardner and Jones had been killed. Now, as this program is wrapping up on July 3rd, 1988, the battery is loading with the National Guard, the Gettysburg gun, back onto its trailer. And they notice that there's Union men lining up behind the stone wall and Confederates coming across the field. This is a reenactment of Pickett's charge in 1988. Ironically, the Gettysburg gun is leaving the field again 125 years later at the very start of Pickett's charge at 3:45 in the afternoon. Ironic. The Gettysburg gun would be brought back to the State House, and on November 22nd, 1988, the Gettysburg gun would once again be dedicated, this time by the members of Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery, and it would stay in the north portico of the Rhode Island State House from 1988 to 2023. In 2023, there had been some petitions made to move the Gettysburg gun from the State House to the Varner Memorial Armory so that it could be better preserved. You got to understand, the Gettysburg gun, if you've ever visited it at the State House, it was right at the doors. And so it had really sustained a lot of visitors, kind of maybe leaning on it, cold weather. The floors weren't exactly really built for a gun. Marble floors are sort of grating for these wheels. So eventually, the governor of Rhode Island, the leadership of the Varner Memorial Armory Museum, members from Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery, would get approval to move the Gettysburg gun from the State House to the museum. Now, this was a major undertaking, ladies and gentlemen. We spent 2 days preparing this gun to be moved. You'll see that we took off the original wheels and protected them putting on reproduction wheels. The trail, which looks like a massive tree trunk when you visited at the Varnum, also had to be supported, right? And it took us 2 days to move this gun from its position outside of the State House. Then we had to go through this very narrow door. You really can't see it here, but there were actually 2 ramps. My friend Dave in the back there will remember this well because he was with us. These 2 little metal ramps. And now remember, I told you the gun weighs 1,232 pounds. That's just the bronze barrel, not the wooden carriage. And we all remember very well going down these 2 little metal ramps, and you can hear them snapping. Okay, we get through that 1 step, and then we eventually bring the gun down to the cobblestone walkway to the awaiting truck. And you'll see that every few feet, we had these felt pads laid down so that the cobblestones wouldn't totally, interrupt the gun's stability. And interestingly enough, this gentleman here, who you see sort of in the lime shirt on the very end of that picture, is a direct descendant of T. Fred Brown, the commander of the battery on July 2nd, who helped us move the gun that day. Well, eventually, the Gettysburg gun would be brought to the Varnum Memorial Armory, and it would be finally put on display. And I remember that moment thinking, wow, this is the dream of the veterans of Battery B. This is what they had wanted all along, right? Think about what happened to this gun since Gettysburg. It had been captured and then recovered, badly damaged, and then totally disabled. It would be lost after the battle and then found. It'd be condemned, sent away, forsaken, eventually recovered again, only to be brought home and be neglected, at some point defaced, eventually demilitarized, then honored, and now finally enshrined. The gun is made of wood and metal, but it was baptized by flesh and blood and bones and brains. And even though it's an instrument of death, it has breathed new life, not only into Battery B, 1st Rhode Island, but into the history of the American Civil War. Now, I asked you earlier tonight if all of this was inevitable. I don't know. That's for you to decide. But I will tell you this. If I told you tonight that you and I came here and we somehow were fulfilling a 152-year promise, would you believe me? I know you didn't know when you walked in here tonight that you'd be fulfilling such a request, but you are. You see, because on May 21st of 1874, when Carlton A. Staples delivered that address of the Gettysburg Gun, that rainy parade day, these are the words that he said. I'm going to read them to you word for word because that's the kind of cool thing here. That day he said, "Take this gun and place it among the proudest archives of the state. Cherish it as a precious legacy from the men who bore it into the forefront of battle and laid down their lives serving it there. Tell your children and your children's children the story of its triumph. Not a triumph of men over man, but a triumph of truth over error, of right over wrong, of freedom over slavery." Tonight, we are those children and our children's children telling the story of this gun. We are them. And I hope that 50 to 100 years from now, people are still telling this story. And when they do, they will resonate with the final words that Carlton A. Staples said that afternoon. He said, "Though this gun be forever silenced, though its voice will never again be heard in the thunders of war, Yet it speaks to us and those who will come after us in tones that cannot be misunderstood. And when that glorious day has come, and come it surely will, may this gun again find voice to speak, and in thunder tones utter the people's joy. Tonight, that joy is ours. And having been able to hear and witness the phenomenal story of the Gettysburg Gun, I thank you for your hospitality and the generosity of your time, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you. I don't know where Mark is, but if we have time for questions, happy to have a couple questions or discussion about what you might be curious. Yes, sir.
Do we have a consensus? Hold your, he's got a microphone. It's not that good a question.
Stop it, David.
Do we have a consensus as to why the company B soldiers enlisted?
Yeah, well, in many of their letters, the enlistment bonus of $15 was good.
Okay.
That's one thing. But there was just a pull of patriotism at the time. Many of the young men will enlist. There's one soldier I didn't talk about tonight. His name was Henry Hosea Ballou. He was 18, and he had turned 18 just before the attack on Fort Sumter, just one day before. And in his letters to his father, he says, look, I'm not going to leave this war until this war is over. There was a true dedication to the cause. Sergeant Strait, who you learned about tonight, same thing. I mean, these guys left family. They left wives, they left children. So there was a dedication to this cause of saving the Union.
Save the Union.
Save the Union. Yeah, yeah, sure. Yes, ma'am.
Do you happen to know where the two men that died beside the gun were buried?
Yes, I do. So directly after the battle, the next day on July 4th, Sergeant Strait will go back to the battlefield, and he will bury both of those men right where they fell, right next to that stone wall. Jones and Gardner would be buried in the same sort of shallow grave, wrapped in a red woolen blanket. On July 16th, Strait will write to Gardner's wife, and he will tell her that your husband is buried at Gettysburg. The flowers that I told you about, she kept all of these flowers because Sergeant Strait not only sent that letter to her telling her where her husband was buried, but he sent the Bible home. Okay? So, Alfred Gardner's wife, her name was Adelia, will send Alfred Gardner's brother to Gettysburg in August. This is a month later, guys. And he will take up the body of Alfred Gardner and bring Alfred Gardner's body home to Swansea, Massachusetts. Okay. So, Alfred Gardner is buried in Swansea, Massachusetts on the Swansea homestead. We don't know exactly where his grave is. It's never been found. William Jones would be buried there originally on the grounds right where he died, but in October and November of 1863, his body would be reinterred and reburied in the Gettysburg National Cemetery, where he rests today. So they're in two different places. By the way, if you visit the Gettysburg National Cemetery, you will see a cenotaph to Alfred Gardner, but he is not there. He's home. I know that was a long way to answer your question, but that's kind of where they are. Yeah. Yes? You got Mark running around. All right. That's good.
Where will it be permanently housed, the gun?
Yeah, so it's on a 2-year loan to the Varnum Memorial Armory. I don't know its future plans, but my thinking is that it will be probably be there for some time. If you're thinking about making a visit to it, I think there are some plans in place for its most proper placement. Yeah. So. Oh, we're not done yet.
Did you want to talk about anything? No. When you mentioned that he was buried in a red blanket, that was one of the symbolic things of the Rhode Island troops. They were given the red blankets.
Correct.
We just buried, October of 24, we buried in Pawtucket a Civil War veteran, and that was the symbolic thing that they put around his remains before they buried the remains itself, they put a red blanket around it, because that was what they did for the Rhode Island troops.
Correct.
That's how the Confederates knew that Rhode Island was coming.
Yeah, yeah. The red had the artillery had these red blankets that they used, and they did bury him in that. Correct. Yep. Thought I saw another hand go up.
If there's no other questions, I have.
Gardner's first name?
Alfred Gray Gardner. Alfred Gray Gardner. Yeah.
So the gentleman, I don't remember his name, but the gentleman who runs up and is trying to get the solid shot into the ground with an axe.
Sergeant Strait.
Is there any accounts or from him or people who were present? Why did he keep trying? Like at that point, you can't get it in. Is that just a drown? I know we can't get in people's heads of the past, but is there any kind of indication of what's going through his head when he's trying that desperately to load the gun? Why he didn't just give up?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you disassemble a package like this, they would have done that when they would fire double canister. So taking a package apart wouldn't have been completely uncommon. I don't know what was in Sergeant Strait's head at that moment, but I would probably say that in that moment, in this really crucible of battle, he's going to reload that gun because they fired 956 rounds in 2 days. So that's what they're going to do. And I think that's what he was programmed to do. I also think that from a human perspective, one of his friends has just been killed, and maybe he is filled with adrenaline, and maybe he is going to do as much as he can to fire that one last shot. So it's hard to say, but I think the battery was trained to, that's what they were trained to do. Yeah.
Any other questions? If not, my balancing act of doing the microphone and everything else. There we go. So Stephen, I want to personally thank you. We were chatting before Stephen flew out here for this presentation and is flying back out this evening. So we want to thank him truly from the bottom of our heart for an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
The candor and the passion that you feel for the subject really comes out, and it was amazing hearing you kind of chronicle the story of this one gun and its importance in American history. So on behalf of the roundtable, a small gesture, a small token of our appreciation.
Thank you.
We like to give our speakers a mug and a certificate of appreciation.
Thank you
for
so
coming
much.
and speaking to us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much.